One of the most common questions that tends to come up when you're working in a design program like InDesign is, how do I bring in a graphic with a transparent background? And if you're working from Illustrator, it's easy. If you're working from Photoshop or some other program, it's a more difficult answer. And so in our particular case, my recommendation is create whatever it is that you need in Illustrator and you're not going to have a problem. I'm going to show you how it would work and what file formats would be good for this. Again, if you're bringing in a logo or something like this, it automatically Illustrator works well for logos and that makes them come in really cleanly. I'm going to show you one example in my scenario that is not a good choice, and I'll tell you why. And then I'll show you how it works if it is set up correctly. All right, so I've got a box that's here. I'm going to place a graphic into this picture area, and I've deliberately created one that's going to be an issue. I've called mine Symbols Background, and it's not going to come in with a transparent background because in Illustrator it was created with a background. And in that scenario, it doesn't matter what I do in InDesign, it's not going to have a transparent background because the original file itself doesn't have a transparent background. So this is the graphic. It's two different icons that I'm using for a design and something I'm doing. One of them is meant to be a bag of clay. The other one's a hand with some clay on it. But anyway, I didn't want them both to display together. And the graphic as created would have worked in here without a background if I hadn't put a turquoise rectangle behind everything. So on this version, it doesn't matter where I put it. I could drag it wherever it goes. It's always going to show up here with the background because the background physically and literally does exist. So I'm going to delete that, and I'm going to place the different version of this same graphic and without that background element to it, and you'll see that it does come in differently. And I saved it as an AI, as an EPS, as a PDF, as a PNG, and as an SVG. And all of those other versions, once I strip the background out, will come into InDesign cleanly without that background piece. I'm using the fitting option and the fill frame proportionally to size it down so that it will fit within the vertical area I'm working with. And it's a little bit wider than I want it, and it's not coming in at exactly the right position, but height-wise, it works. Okay, so this is the element minus the background, and that was the AI file. If I did the PNG, the EPS, all of those, they would come in the same. The one thing I will mention is all of these other ones, the AI, the EPS, and the PDF, are all still vector, which means I can scale them up and down in InDesign however I want to and not worry about the file quality. The PNG, which is an export out of Illustrator rather than just a save function, is rasterized. And that one you have to choose the resolution you want when you export it out of Illustrator. But a PNG file will still support the background transparency. Is it the best choice coming out of Illustrator and into InDesign? No, because there's no reason not to stick with EPS, AI, or PDF in those circumstances. But if you're using LucidPress, PNG is your only option if you want background transparency. So this is one of the differences in InDesign and a lot of the other design applications. It's a little bit more flexible. Now, second most common question I get when people start to do the layout, they get a little confused about what their lines mean. Again, remember our red is our bleed, the very most outline edge. The thin black line that I'm seeing here is my document edge. So I currently have my graphic hanging off the bottom edge of my document. That doesn't seem like a very good idea. So don't get confused about what your bleed as compared to your document size as compared to your margin are. The red lines always represent the bleed, the black line is going to be document edge, and the sort of pinky purple will always be margins. The blue border is, in fact, an edge of one of your content areas. So just be careful, keep an eye on it, pay attention to what you're working with, and then typically you'll be better off. Okay, so I've made my graphic small enough that it's at least fitting on the card now. Now, second most common question is, I'm having a hard time visualizing this with all these lines and all these borders and so forth. Is there any way I can fix this? Yes. If you go up to your view window, you have a preview on CPU, which is what we're currently kind of looking at, but overprint preview is a little bit more detailed. It's going to gray or blacken out or darken the bleed area, which in many cases people find helpful because it's easier to visualize a bit of what's going on there. That's not my favorite option, to be honest with you, so I'm going to turn off overprint preview. It's a little harder on the CPU, so I tend to not use it as much. And then we can go down to screen mode. If you're really trying to visualize this, rather than working in overprint preview, you can change your screen mode from normal to preview. The preview will hide borders and frames, it'll hide margin edges, and it'll hide your bleed. So you're able to more easily and quickly visualize what yours looks like. To switch back, you go back to view, and to screen mode, switch it back to normal, and you're able to see that again. Your bleed visually comes back, your borders and frames and all that kind of stuff comes back. But again, it's a really nice option to visualize what's happening within your design. You're going to place, in addition to any graphics, your text fields, and you're going to style these so that they're visible. Make sure that you consider contrast. I have a 75% gray background. Black text against a 75% gray background is a terrible idea. So if I were doing this, I would make sure that I picked something that is going to show up against the background. It needs to be large enough, it needs to be bold enough, and it needs to have enough color contrast to work in my particular scenario. So I would pick something probably in a white rather than a black. And in our case, I don't know if you found this already, you probably did in one of the earlier assignments, you're not choosing white, you're choosing paper, because the paper color you're printing on is the color, the lightest color that your text can be, unless you're printing in white ink, and that's very unusual. So what you're getting by choosing paper is a punch through any color or any graphic that you have happening elsewhere on your page to whatever your lightest background color is going to be, and the white should show up in that particular case and work for you. Okay, so hopefully those tips will help you in terms of your business card. Keep in mind that it needs to look designed. So it needs to look not just like you stuck a couple of text elements on there. You need to consider your fonts. You need to consider the size of them, the style of them, the placement of them, what other graphics are there. Are they distracting? Does the text information hold up? Because theoretically, that is the most important thing on the card. Is it readable? Has it been separated out so that it's in meaningful chunks? Meaning our idea of proximity and related elements going together and that kind of thing. All of those are considerations.